Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Wednesday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. He is the newest member of the Lakers. He is Christian Koloko, and he hasn't played in a long time. We will get a scouting report with Sean Woodley of Locked On Raptors next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, no matter how or where you get your podcasts. It's always free, never behind a paywall. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go hang out with over 25,000 subscribers to the channel, all of whom are very interested in Christian Koloko, the newest Laker brought in on a two-way deal earlier this week. Do want to let people know that today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app. Create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. We, and by we, I mean Andy, spoke with Sean Woodley, the host of Locked On Raptors earlier on Tuesday. Got a scouting report for Christian Koloko. So let's take you right to that.
All right. So thanks for joining us, Sean. Your impressions of Christian Koloko during that one season in Toronto, high second round pick for the Raptors. And he ended up playing, we'll talk about this, in more games than a second round pick typically does. Overall impressions of him, strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, I mean, I think during his time with the Raptors, defensive specialist is kind of how I'd classify him, right? He's not someone who's going to come in and be like a short roll creator. He's not going to be someone who, frankly, is all that dexterous at like catching passes and finishing in traffic, right? He's big and tall, but the offensive package is pretty limited. But on defense, I think the thing that Koloko most brings to the table is just like he's freaking enormous, and being freaking enormous is really valuable in the modern NBA, where just like having length and size is very much in vogue. And look, I think some of Koloko's sort of advanced defensive metrics are a little bit inflated because he was often playing in lineups for that Raptors team. If you recall, this was Division 6-9 Toronto Raptors, where everyone was huge and long and rangy. And basically anytime they had a legitimate center in there as kind of the backstop to all the big, long, rangy dudes, they were more or less impossible to score on. I think in a more sort of traditional team construct where everyone 2, 3, 4 is not a 6'9" rangy dude with a 7+ foot wingspan, it's probably going to look a little bit less sort of dramatic in terms of his on-court impact. And look, his on-court impact was dramatic for that team. But I think we saw that year when they traded for Jakob Poeltl at the trade deadline, putting him in with the Raptors starters also had this incredible effect because that team was just crying for any kind of center play whatsoever. Koloko was able to give it in spurts. And I think, defensively, there is a lot of skill there. I think the way he can cover ground is pretty impressive. There were times where he'd hedge high on pick and roll and track all the way back to the rim to block a shot on the back end. Not something I think he was really expected to do all that much coming out of college. I think there was this expectation that he'd be this sort of traditional stay-at-home drop back big. I think he's got a little bit more ranginess to him than that. Not necessarily as like a switch defender, but someone who can hedge and recover. But I think the thing that I'm really, concerned about with Koloko and curious about, and sort of the thing that gave me pause when it seemed like the Raptors might bring him back, is just that, he was someone who was very raw to begin with, and then he hasn't played a game for what will be like 18 months by the time he gets on the court. That feels like a pretty damaging thing to one's player development, especially when you're in your early 20s and it's a pretty crucial point of development. So I'm fascinated to see where he's at, but that's kind of the last time we saw him. That's sort of the scouting report on Koloko. Defensive specialist, lots of potential there. Offensively, a whole lot of room to grow.
Is there any NBA player in particular that he reminds you of, even as like a poor man's version of that guy?
That's interesting. I'm trying to think of maybe like a Nerlens Noel at the very best, like pretty limited offensive player. Maybe there's some pick and roll juice you can kind of tap into there, but really it's all about the rim protection and size and length and athleticism that he's bringing to the table. That's player comps I'm never very, very good at, but I think that's probably about as close as I can get.
58 games is a lot, like mentioned before, for a second round rookie. Was this a question of need and somebody's got to play it, or did it feel more like he was actually surprising people and taking minutes, so to speak?
I suppose it's a little bit of both. I think it was more so the former, right? That team famously went into their season in 2022-23 with no centers on the roster with any kind of NBA experience. An interesting choice. This was on the heels of having pretty hard runs with, Aaron Baines as the center. And their season in 2021-22, they were surprisingly good. They won 48 games, and they didn't really have a traditional center on those teams either. It was a lot of Pascal Siakam at the 5. It was a lot of Chris Boucher and Precious Achiuwa coming in and being chaos boys off the bench. And they got by without traditional center play, playing very unorthodox lineups in a very strange sort of gamified style where they also were playing their starters like 40 minutes a night and running them into the ground. It wasn't super sustainable, and they didn't really go and add a center in that summer of 2022. The Raptors should have traded for Jakob Poeltl to start that season, and I don't think anyone looks at that Poeltl trade as some great mistake like a lot of people do now. But yeah, they went into that season without an actual center to roll out, and I think that really caught up to them as the traditional things you need from centers. As the league kind of figured out what that team was doing, their offense really struggled, and they didn't have someone to set good screens and be a roll target in pick and roll combinations and just do all this stuff that you need centers to do. So that's where Koloko came in, and I think it was very much you're the only guy over 6'9" on this roster. We just got to throw you out here and see what happens. And again, looked pretty good defensively because he was playing with really good defensive players, and it was a nice backstop for it. But yeah, it was fully out of necessity. I don't think he was necessarily doing anything all that amazing, all that sort of shocking for a second round rookie that sort of earned him those minutes. And we saw once Jakob Poeltl was acquired, he basically finished the season with the G League and didn't really factor into the rotation very much because they had someone who was just a lot better at all those center things than Koloko was at that time.
This gets into a lot what the Lakers could be looking for in Koloko or whoever would play behind AD. There's an element of being a doctor first, do no harm. Was he able to get out there and not screw things up?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always going to be nights as a rookie where things pop up and you just kind of look like you're a deer in headlights. That certainly happened. I think certainly I don't think he took much off the table defensively just because, like I talked about, he's just huge and he just provides a lot of space filling as a big man that you need. Offensively, though, things got pretty rough. Those lineups did not. They held teams under 100 points per 100 possessions. They didn't score a whole lot more than that, though. And so if you're trying to balance offense and defense and have a really effective offensive unit out there, I'm not sure Christian Koloko can be a huge part of that. Now, those Raptors teams, again, it was Scotty Barnes, OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam playing together a lot where, kind of a lot of overlap, not a ton of spacing, maybe Koloko in a different environment with, a pull-up shooting guard like D'Angelo Russell or, with LeBron on the wing or whatever. There's probably a world in which it's a better fit offensively with Koloko, but again, his skill set is not super advanced on that end. And again, I think that's probably the thing that you worry about atrophying the most when you don't play for over a full year, right? So, doesn't take anything away from the defense. Offensively, certainly I think puts a cap on how good you can be, at least the last version of Christian Koloko we saw. There were some inklings here and there playing in the G League and stuff that, okay, maybe there's some short roll passing here. Maybe there's some vision, never really translated in the NBA. And we'll see if all the time off has allowed him to kind of work on that craft or if it's caused what was already a pretty middling or low end skill set to, get even worse at that time.
Does he have bad hands?
Yes. Not making catches on the roll, just the touch wasn't super great, missed a lot of stuff, just like bunnies on the interior, that type of stuff for sure. The hands are certainly the thing that need to come the longest way.
Did it seem to have any instincts that were okay? If, say, either the hands improved or maybe the confidence improved, whatever, were there ever times where you saw okay, instinctively he seems to have a feel for what he's supposed to do, or was feel an issue as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough because I always kind of put feel and hands kind of almost in the same basket, or there's this deft touch. It all kind of feels like it's under the same umbrella. But no, I think because he's a really good defender, I think being a good defender typically translates to having pretty good feel on the offensive end as well. Like it's just like a high basketball IQ thing. So yeah, like if he can refine the hands a little bit, figure out, some ways to weaponize some passing and his height and all that, there probably is a little bit more to tap into there. Look, he's 24 years old. There's more to tap into with most 24-year-olds, right? And so the version of Koloko we saw with the Raptors is probably not the version we'll see with the Lakers if he gets rolled out there. It's just a shame because I think there was an avenue here if he had played last season, been part of the Raptors development program where he, comes along and the offensive stuff gets ironed out. It almost feels like he started from scratch though, after so much time off. And I'm fascinated to see where he's at with the hands, with the touch. But yeah, like I mentioned, late in that season when he was more or less with the G League, I remember I was actually in a game in Detroit where the Raptors 905 was playing the Motor City Cruise or whatever it is. I was sitting like one row behind the Raptors 905 bench. And you could kind of see the inklings of, some outlet passes, some stuff from the elbows. They were clearly trying to get him to run that stuff. Middling results, mixed results, all that. But yeah, I do think there's a smart basketball player in there. If he can refine the hands and the touch, then certainly there's a little bit more to tap into on offense. And, I would hope there is, because there was not a whole lot of offense to speak of during that year where I think he averaged 3 points a game over the 58 he played.
Coming up, I asked Sean Woodley one very important question about Christian Koloko, part of our scouting report. That's next. Locked on Lakers is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We got something a little different for you right now. Through September 22nd, so that's coming up really quick, all FanDuel customers can bet just $5 and you get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. And then with the YouTube TV-based plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. And while you start getting ready to set up, you can also think about the 24-25 odds for the upcoming NBA season. Our friends at FanDuel, as of this recording, have the Lakers 35-1 to win the championship, Anthony Davis 150-1 for MVP, and also 25-1 for Defensive Player of the Year. Dalton Knecht 10-1 for Rookie of the Year. Max Christie 150-1 for Most Improved Player. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. The Raptors that season that Koloko was with them, they were a 500 team. They weren't bad, but they were, you talked about it a little bit, in transition and kind of in a carryover to where they are right now. It looked like they were kind of figuring out who is going to be a part of the future, who isn't. There weren't necessarily a lot of high leverage minutes and games for that season. The Lakers, if nothing else, see themselves as a team that wants to be in a championship mix. They absolutely should see themselves as a playoff team. Based on what you saw with Koloko, health assumed, do you think that he's somebody that could be on the floor for like 10 or 12 minutes a night on a team with actual ambitions? Like that could be a possibility for him?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to the offense, Andy. Like I think if he can just be just a neutral offensive player who doesn't take anything away, then yeah, that defense is going to play in high leverage games where things matter, right? Like it's just, he's got the rim protection juice. I have questions about if they're going to play him with Anthony Davis. How does that all work? That feels like it could be pretty cluttered. Yeah. So yeah, if he's filling in backup minutes for Anthony Davis, then yeah, let's put it this way. If Christian Koloko, like the fully idealized version of Christian Koloko, were the backup center for recent versions of the 76ers who've had no idea how to fill in behind Joel Embiid, I think he'd be better than like 80% of the options they've had. He's better than 2019 Greg Monroe, let's put it that way. Is he doing a ton to sort of win those minutes for you necessarily? Probably not, but you're probably holding serve and hanging tight and winning his 6 minutes 4-2. It's kind of the goal I think you're shooting for there. But because of the defensive juice he brings, I certainly think if he's up to it physically, if the 18 months of not playing haven't decayed his skills or whatever, I think there's a chance he can be a viable, 9th, 10th man on a team with serious ambitions for sure. I'm skeptical of what 18 months off does for a guy who's at that critical juncture of his development, and it sucks. And I'm rooting for Koloko big time, but this is why I was pretty reticent for the Raptors to go and bring him back. Like, I think a lot of Raptors fans really wanted to see Koloko return to Toronto, and I just couldn't quite be sold on the vision of it because of the time off at such an important part of his development curve. So hoping for the best with Koloko, but certainly I think you got to go in with tempered expectations, because it's hard for anyone to miss 18 months and come back and be themselves, especially for someone who I don't think even figured out who himself was, if that's a sentence, before the health stuff took him out of the lineup last year.
He is Sean Woodley. He covers the Raptors for Locked on Raptors. Check out his work. Great coverage of the guys up north. Appreciate the time, Sean. Thank you very much.
Anytime, Andy.
All right. Thanks again to Sean Woodley of Locked on Raptors for making the time. I made the comment, Andy, before we started that, it is an unusual amount of attention that is given to a two-way center who has played all of one season in the NBA. And even by that, all of one season isn't even 40 minutes a game. But it's reflective of the offseason the Lakers have had and the positional need that Koloko at least attempts to address, that we are focusing so much on whether or not the guy has a chance to be playable this year.
Well, this gets back to why you and I talked about when the news of Koloko first broke, that it made sense for Blake Hinson to be cut, and that, they would preserve the two-way contracts for Colin Castleton and also for even Armel Traore, who's not a true big, but he plays bigger than Blake Hinson. Yeah, he plays more like a big forward than Blake Hinson, who plays more like a big shooting guard, and more of like a sturdy shooting guard than any type of forward or big. And the opportunities for somebody like Christian Koloko, despite the inexperience, despite the fact that he still has to prove that he is, able to physically handle the NBA, that his health is all in order, all of that stuff, there is an opportunity out there for him to fill a specific need that, for the time being, particularly with Christian Wood unavailable till at least sometime through November, it's very unsettled. And it's basically one of these other guys can step into this role, whether you're talking about Koloko, Castleton, or Jackson Hayes, who, all things being equal, will likely have the first crack at this thing, or you end up playing small ball center lineups with LeBron or Rui. And we've seen over the past couple seasons that can work at times, but at other times it creates real problems for the team.
It's, one of the things that really stuck out to me, to your point, Andy, is what Sean said about why Koloko was playing in the first place. Is that Toronto team didn't have a center. They did not have a guy who could play that role. And, he was a big, rangy, athletic player and helped that defense. You need a guy. Even if you don't plan on, even if you want to be able to go small, even if you want to have the lineups that are flexible, where you push the pace or this or that or whatever, and you can think you can get away with LeBron at center or this, somewhere on the roster, you need to be able to have a rim protector or have some size or have something that you can deploy when you need it. And so, we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next segment. It's they now have at least three guys they can choose from. 50 games each from Castleton and Koloko, and obviously a regular contract for Hayes until Christian Wood is healthy. And then they obviously have the fourth guy and the two-way guys.
Or until December 15th, when more guys are trade eligible, whichever comes first.
Whichever comes first. And you have a situation where once Wood is healthy, presumably one and or both of the two-way guys you just won't see very much, because they're two-way players and they'll be playing in the G League, and both of them need time to develop. I think Koloko has been away from the game, as Sean mentioned, for 18 months. He's going to need time. He was a raw player before that, so he's going to need time to develop. Castleton needs to get better, and so ideally you want those guys playing. But at least it seems like he gives the Lakers a choice for these first few weeks while Wood isn't available. And even when Wood is available, because he's a much better defensive player, it sounds like.
You've said a couple words right now that I think really speak to what the Lakers are looking for, which is choice and versatile, like options. For all of the focus when people talk about the 2020 championship team, for all of the focus on the two bigs they had with JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard, and Anthony Davis could play at the 4, and they should be looking to replicate all of that again. And like, why did they stop doing what was working? Why, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I think people forget what really made that team so difficult to deal with was the size options you had because of Kyle Kuzma and Markieff Morris. Like when they used to be able to play what I called during that season when we covered it, medium ball. Because when you've got AD and LeBron and Kuzma out there, or Markieff Morris out there, you're still really damn big. Like that may be going small for the Lakers. Going for the rest of the league, that's somewhere between still big and, again, medium ball, combined with a guy like KCP, who was not small for his position. Danny Green, not small for his position. Alex Caruso, able to guard up with strength, Rondo's length. The Lakers overwhelmed you with size that season, but it wasn't just because of JaVale and Dwight, like those presences. They in specific matchups were really important, but I think people focus way too much on like just Dwight, JaVale, AD at the 4. Why can't we do that again? As opposed to all the different choices they have lacked. The problem isn't that you can't play AD at the 4 because they haven't had enough bigs around him. The problem is they've just lacked options. And you hope that Koloko or Castleton or Hayes or Wood just gives you more options.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about a little bit more about what Sean said about Koloko, the player, how we think he might or might not be used, to what extent he might be used, and what this theoretically changes about the Lakers center rotation. We'll get all that next.
Locked on Lakers is brought to you by GameTime. My daughter's 13. We've bonded a lot through the years over music. Right now it's Frank Ocean. She is obsessed with Frank Ocean. He hasn't put out an album in about 8 years, but she has seen rumors that he's back in the studio, which would mean a tour, which would mean also a concert. I have promised if he goes on tour, I will get us tickets, even though I know they will be hard as hell to get if I wasn't using GameTime, because they actually make this easy with new features like GameTime Picks, which filters out all the confusing, flowery verbiage, and it just shows you the incredible deals on the great seats. That's it. Saves you time. They offer panoramic seat views before you buy, so you get an idea of exactly what your view to the stage is, how everything around you is going to look. It feels like you're already inside the building. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off.
Thanks again for making Locked On Lakers first listen of every day. Check out the Locked On NBA podcast for your second listen. That is where you can catch up with everything going on around the league. Local experts like the ones who host this very show. Andy, especially, particularly appears on that on the Locked On NBA a lot. So if you like Andy, go watch it. And if you don't, he's not on it on a lot of other days. So just pick the ones that he's not. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I wasn't terribly surprised by anything that Sean said in his scouting report, like that he is Koloko is a very talented, large, athletic defensive center. He can do a lot of things on that side of the ball, and that I thought that it was good that he said he could hold up in a more traditional setup with real guards. Toronto was playing a very different style and a different kind of lineup. But that he would, still be a good defensive center in basically any system, and that his offense was really, really bad. I mean, that was basically what you expected. But it would have been much more worrisome had Sean said, yeah, the numbers really kind of lied there and different, take that context away. He's got some real deficiency. He does seem like a player who has a very specific and useful skill.
That was the big thing. Like I had mentioned during the interview, my final question was very important, which was just, do you think he can actually play 10, 12 minutes a night on a team with actual ambition, like with stakes? And he said, yeah, he thinks so. Like, assuming, again, he is back up to NBA speed, conditioning's not an issue, health's not an issue, and there hasn't been any form of just attrition from having been away from the game for a year, which is a big deal for a developing player. But all of those caveats acknowledged, he felt like you could potentially put Koloko on the floor in that backup role. His immediate instinct was similar to yours and mine, Brian, which is like the idea that Koloko could get additional minutes because he'd be playing with Anthony Davis in addition to relieving. It's like, no, that's not likely going to happen.
It seems like he seems like a difficult fit with everyone offensively, which is kind of part of the problem. But at the same time,
happening much. I just also, to be honest, I don't even think it's entirely about fit as much as it is just there are only so many minutes you can likely play this guy before the returns begin to diminish.
The fact that the defensive benefit you get is outweighed by the fact you can't score.
Right. But I do feel like if you had a second unit that includes enough guys who can score, and obviously there will be first unit guys mixing and matching with the bench. They're not likely to go full hockey shifts. I think there are ways where you can put enough scoring around Koloko, where also too, depending on who we're talking about in some of those lineups, he might be able to cover for them in certain ways as well. So if at worst it ends up like an overall neutral with Koloko being out there for 10 to 12 minutes, that's a win, both contextually for what the team's looking for and also for a guy that you have on a two-way deal. It's a big win.
Oh, for sure. And, I think too, it's important to remember, he is a more extreme version of Hayes, for example. So you get into a situation where this matchup, the second time through a rotation in the second half, you're up by 11, you're up by 14. Maybe instead of Hayes, you go to the defensive center, if he's there that night. He's not going to be there every game. I mean, it's the other thing to remember. He's not going to be active every game, but again, I'm picturing a lot of this with the idea that Wood is missing for a lot of time. Let's say Wood is gone through November, which is reasonable. They're not going to look at him again until whatever it is, 8 weeks was the first week of November from when they announced the surgery. That's when the reevaluation happens. Right. So in theory, if things are going well, maybe they go really well and he's back faster than that, but things are going well. Okay, you can start doing basketball stuff again, but you haven't played camp. You just came off surgery, and it's a recurrence of an injury that happened last year. 3 weeks probably before you're
back. If he's back by Thanksgiving, I would consider that a pretty good outcome.
A really good outcome.
Yeah.
And so that leaves you with a month's worth of games, or maybe a month and a half, 6 weeks worth of games, or 8 weeks worth of games where you have to cover that. Koloko's probably going to be with you or Castleton for a lot of those games because you have 50 to play with. And in those 50, you can deploy your players selectively. And I think that, Hayes, it's not like you can play Hayes for 25, 30 minutes either without running into some serious diminishing returns.
He'll foul out.
Right. And not during that magical run. He had a magical run last year.
He did. That was amazing.
And, and hopefully it indicates, some growth as a player, but he's a limited guy. Castleton is a limited guy. All three of these players are guys that you look at and you say, if we need to, can we squeeze, like you said, 8 to 15 minutes on any given night? If we think we need to do more than that, we've probably got significantly larger problems.
you're
And
really marking down till December 15th, or you have to make a move that maybe, all things being equal, you don't want to, or you feel like you're paying a little bit too much in the exchange, but you simply just, this is not tenable.
at least now you have, if Koloko has a good camp, Castleton comes and has a good camp, Jackson Hayes looks like, the player he was last year, which is, I think, what he is, which is a handy guy to have as your third center on a team, because he's competent, good at some things. You can deploy him, energy, this, that, and whatever. So we'll see what Koloko looks like coming out of camp. If he looks like he can play a little bit, now you have the defensive guy, the offensive guy, and the hybrid guy, the guy who's kind of the energy, something in the middle, can finish your lobs, a little bit more skilled, obviously, than Koloko, better defender than Castleton, but not, but limited. But Koloko's a big guy. I mean, he's what Jackson Hayes is listed, I think, at 220.
Yeah, he's
something
about
like that.
10 or so pounds.
20.
Yeah, I think
Koloko is listed at least 10 bigger than that.
Right, exactly. He's listed, I believe, at 7 foot 230. Hayes is like 6'11" or 7 220.
So a little bit bigger, like a little bit more size. And that makes a difference too. So I people were, again, coming at me awfully hard over the Christian Koloko takes from earlier in the week, but like I am very pro this. I think it's a much better use of a two-way contract than Hinson. I just think people need to understand, like, slow down. He's a guy who's played one season of NBA ball, was a very raw player in that context. And as Sean noted, as soon as they had an option that was better, didn't play again. Then is missed a year plus. So like it's unfair to him to expect him to come in and be like a real difference maker for a team with ambition.
Yeah. The way that I look at it is, if you're looking for somebody to expand the Lakers' ceiling, you're putting too much on Christian Koloko. You're being unrealistic about this. If you are looking, though, for somebody who at times may be able to fill holes in ways that, if not raises your floor, keeps your floor from lowering, there I think Koloko actually could play a role, and that role is useful.
Can I tell you what my favorite thing about this is before we go? He's not as young as people. He's 24, which means he just turned 24. So you're basically a young 24, which, is not brawny aged. It's not, Max Christie. Like, he's older than a lot of guys. Age. Right. I mean, and we talked about Dalton Connect being old, but he is a young player that was intriguing, that they acquired cheaply and now have in their system. And if 2 or 3 years from now, they have a second or a third string center who can capably play 15 minutes a night, 10 minutes a night, or whatever, or be a fringy rotation player for this team, that's a big win. Like, they don't have access to players like this because they don't have a lot of draft picks. They don't have any space on their roster. Like, so yeah, it's a smart move to go get a guy with a little bit of upside and see if you can turn him into something. That's really what I like about this. And they have a much better chance of Koloko turning into something. Again, no disrespect to Blake Hinson, who's going to, make millions of dollars playing basketball somewhere, and turn him into, I just don't think he has that kind of utility in the NBA. So that's really what I like best about this.
Yeah, actually, the last thing I would add too, for all of the clutch jokes we often make because they're fun, this is one of those times where maybe the clutch connection actually pays off in a
well. It's,
in a
you know what it is.
nice
It's opportunity. Like all these other guys we've talked about, Gary Trent. Well, he's not going to have a chance to play here. Like, you look at all these things. Tyus Jones. Where is he going to play? Where is the time here and all that kind of stuff? This is a place where it worked out. The position where, if you're a center trying to establish yourself and look for somewhere where you might actually play, come to the Los Angeles Lakers. This is actually a place where you can fill a hole. So the opportunity problem, which has been something for the Lakers all off season, actually helped them in this case. And like you said, clutch probably doesn't help either. Clutch probably doesn't hurt either. Locked On Lakers, where you can go to hang out with over 25,000 subscribers. Still plenty more to talk about through this week as we inch towards training camp. It's coming. It's coming.
Yes, it is.
We will see everyone tomorrow.